Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. My name is Emery Gerlach, and I am the weekend manager. We would like to go over a couple brief things before we get started with our talk today. First of all, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Richard and Linda Smarg and M&T Bank. We'd also like to thank CCTV for recording this program for us, as well as Margaret Rushlow and JC Calandrelli for the refreshments. Thank you. Our upcoming events include, on August 15th, 2026, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., a reenactment for Fanny's Day with flax harvest, crafts, guided nature walk, and more. This will be one of our free admission days. August 16th, from 2 to 3 p.m., will be the free monthly lecture, When Fanny Met Ethan, Fanny Allen Sojourns in Westminster by Jesse Haas. August 19th, 2026, at 4:30 p.m., will be the fundraiser cruise celebrating America's 250th and supporting our museum. Information to sign up for that cruise is online, and there are limited spots, so I would encourage looking now. I would also like to introduce Angie Grove, the executive director here at the museum, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Oh, Emery, can I have that? Emery, can I have that page? I need it too. Thanks. We all need our cheat sheets, right? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Angie Grove. I'm the executive director here at the Ethan Allen Homestead. Thanks for coming in today. And I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker today for our free monthly lecture. I also have the pleasure to announce that this is our Thomas M. Achenbach Memorial Talk after the late Thomas Achenbach, who was a true supporter of the homestead in all ways. And we're very grateful to have members of his family here today as well, who have sponsored this program and have also just carried on that support of the homestead. So thank you all for coming, and yes, thank you to him. Okay, so our lecture today, I think Thomas Achenbach would really enjoy this because we're digging into kind of an untold chapter of Ethan Allen's life, and Thomas Achenbach really loved Ethan Allen's history and Ethan Allen's story. And this untold chapter is actually one of the laborers that worked here under Ethan Allen here at the farm. And this person, Newport, who Carol is going to talk a lot more about, but I'll just say is the only reason he's in history at all is because he was with Ethan Allen on the day Ethan Allen died. And so the story of Ethan Allen's death has been something kind of a folklore in Vermont history. And so I think Mr. Achenbach would have really liked hearing more about this story and who was with Ethan in his final hours. So today presenting this story is Dr. Carol Harris-Shapiro. She is a professor emerita at Temple University with research interests in American religion and personal interests in pretty much everything historical. That has brought her here to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum maybe 2 years ago. Started as a volunteer tour guide, and then I roped her in to become one of our volunteer researchers for our newest exhibit, which is on the other side of this wall, which features untold stories from the Revolution. And Carol, I convinced her to take on the really challenging task of helping me research Newport so that we could tell his story from the Revolution. So when Carol is not volunteering here and doing research for the Ethan Allen Homestead, she's also doing research for Vermont Historical Society at the Leahy Library. She spends her summers and autumns in Barre, Vermont, and also enjoys hiking with her husband John and her 2 fur babies, which I can relate to as well. So please help me welcome Dr. Carol Harris-Shapiro.
Good afternoon. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really honored that so many people turned out on such a gorgeous day to find out more about Newport. So thank you. So one of the things that I promised to do is to be super timely. I have a large watch and I'm not afraid to use it. The other thing is I pace usually when I teach. I have promised not to pace, but if you see me do a little dance at the podium here, it's just my feet needing to go do something. But I'm not going to sing despite the music stand here. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Newport. This is going to be bringing you guys into the research with me to some extent, okay? I am not, my PhD is in religious studies, not history, but this is my third history mystery that I've been involved with on a volunteer basis. The first was to find out more about John F. Kennedy Jr.'s nursemaid. I can tell you about that at the Q&A if you're interested. It was quite successful. The second, for a house museum in Philadelphia, finding out how a woman who started out as a maid on the property became an heiress and what her history was in England. That was also a lot of fun. This is my third. So I'm going to tell you things that I have discovered, things that we still don't know, and areas where a very intrepid and careful historian might be able to still uncover more, okay? So let's go ahead and begin. Let's go ahead and begin. Here we go. Okay, so the first thing we have to figure out is the name. How do we, heck do we know that there was this person by the name of Newport who worked on the homestead here? And this is really where we get the name. It's testimony from a gentleman who is known in different ways as Hawley Winters or Hawley Witters. And he worked on the homestead as a teenager, helping with things like harvest and so forth. And he gives us the information. He lived in West Georgia, Vermont, and in an effort to find where Ethan Allen was buried, this was done in the 1850s, so that they could put a fitting memorial up to him, he narrated his experiences to the gentleman who was trying to get the information about Ethan Allen's last hours, last days, and to figure out where he was buried. And his testimony was from June 5th, 1858, and he said that a mulatto man called Newport was the driver for Ethan Allen when they went up to South Hero in February of 1789 to get fodder for animals. On the way back, Ethan had a stroke, and Mr. Witters was saying that this man said it was a very difficult trip on the way back, but he was able to bring Ethan back, the cart, the oxen, the load of fodder, and that is how Ethan died in his bed. Now, that's interesting. A mulatto man named Newport. What does this tell us about Newport? Well, he was a man. Hawley Witters was 17 when he worked here. What point do you say man? Who is a man to someone who is 17? Is it another 17-year-old? Would he consider himself a man? And this is going to speak to the possible status of Newport. Newport. What's a question we would have immediately if we wanted to research this gentleman?
Is he from Newport?
Is he from Newport? If his name is Newport, what other questions? Which Newport? Oh,
Vermont or
Newport, Rhode Island. Okay, good questions. Any other questions we would immediately want to know? First name or last name, or having only a single name. And if he had only a single name, he might have been enslaved, right? So this becomes quite difficult for the researcher because we don't know, okay? He was called Newport, okay? We don't know what age he was. What does this mean, mulatto, okay? What it actually means is mixed race. So it could be somebody with both African and European ancestry together. It could be somebody with African and Native American ancestry, however. And it could be someone who is European with Native American ancestry. All of these kinds of individuals could be referred to as mulatto. So that complicates things. So far, we have not narrowed anything down particularly, and it gets worse. Okay, he drove Ethan Allen. This one time, we have the testimony that he drove Ethan Allen. Great. Can we say anything else about him? Not necessarily. Got him home to die in his bed. That shows that at least he was faithful enough and trustworthy enough and physically strong enough to have been able to accomplish that. Okay? Okay. Is there really a Holy Witters? I had to ask that question. Is he a reliable narrator? Who is this guy? Okay. What did he mean by mulatto? See, you guys are so good. Was Newport a first or last name? Was Newport a slave, hired man, or indentured servant? And how old is a man? Okay. Indentured servitude still existed in Vermont even after the Vermont Constitution of 1777. You could have someone basically enslaved until the age of 21. And so could this have been a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old, in which case, Revolutionary War, he would have been too young. But we don't know. Let's continue. It gets worse, then it gets better. Okay. So what can we say? All right, so I actually looked up the sworn statements of several people who were either teenagers or children at the time that Ethan Allen and Fanny lived at the Homestead. And because these were sworn statements in front of a judge, signed by the people who gave their statements, it really feels like that would be reliable. Mainly because, at least it's honest, they're honest recollections. Because in 1858, you don't swear to something and just have made something up out of thin air. People took oaths very seriously. So, and I also looked up Holy Witters. He did live in West Georgia, Vermont, so the census relates, but also all of their narration relates. There were two other people who were interviewed. One was a woman by the name of Hulda Lawrence. She was only 6 years old at the time, but she remembers the man who was with Ethan Allen when he passed away, or when he was brought home unconscious. She referred to as a Negro. And there was also the testimony of a Mr. Henry Collins, again, a child at the time, who recalled two black men working for the family, okay? So we have some connection that there was at least people of color working on the homestead, and that relates to something else. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to keep on going here. Okay, let me go to Ethan's letter to Levi, okay? There is Henry Dupuy wrote a very, very early biography of Ethan Allen, and he wrote this in 1853. This biography showed that there was the young boy who remembers, young boy living with the Bradleys, who remembers a man of color being Ethan Allen's driver when he and Fanny go off after their quick marriage, go off into the sunset. And that was a memory that he had. Now, I think that Duffy and Mueller, who wrote Inventing Ethan Allen, were absolutely right that a child, maybe not even yet 2 years old, is not going to have a memory of that he was probably told that. But if he was told that, it doesn't make it untrue, right? So this could be the gentleman who also was a driver for Ethan Allen as early as his encounter and marriage with Fanny. So that would take us back from 1789 to approximately 1783, 84. Okay? So this could be our guy. Okay, so the other piece we know is that Ethan Allen wrote a letter to Levi Allen asking that he would get some clothing for my Negroes. Okay? And we don't know what the word "my" means here. We don't know whether he was talking about, again, hired men, indentured servants, slaves. Even though slavery was illegal at this point, there were a lot of people who were holding slaves because to enforce it through the wilds of Vermont would have been very difficult. All righty then. So let's assume, and that was part of my thing, to find out whether we could find this Newport connected to the Revolutionary War. Any record of Revolutionary War involvement? Any census tax, legal church, or other records? Is there evidence that Ethan Allen owned slaves? Is there evidence that Ethan Allen employed men of color in some capacity? We do know that because we have Ethan Allen's own letter. Does Ethan Allen have a connection with a man of color as his laborer before he moves on to the homestead? And that is the William Czar Bradley statement that a man of color was driving the wagon that Ethan and Fanny went off in. Okay, so we have two of these questions answered. We do not have the top three answered as of yet. Okay. All right. We covered this, and here is a piece from the letter that Ethan sent. I likewise desire you would send me strong winter cloth for garments and overalls for my Negroes, also shoes and winter woolen stockings for me and them. So we know at least two people, and probably overalls, probably both male. Okay. No, we have no legal or financial evidence that Newport was a slave. Now, no bill of sale that we have right now to Ethan or from Ethan's estate, okay? Now, Ethan died without a will, and that makes this even more troubling because we only have a list of his personal effects. There was all the argument over who actually owned the property here between Fanny, and she becomes remarried, Fanny Pennyman and Ira Allen, lots and lots of back and forths, but we don't have the livestock, and sadly, if you had slaves, they would often be listed with the livestock and furniture. We don't have that list. As far as I know, someone can correct me. We don't have any manumission documents, no documents freeing anybody from Ethan. No agreement hiring out Newport to other white families, which was also a common occurrence. Now, Ethan Allen complained of being cash poor in letter after letter between 1786 and 1787, but a healthy male slave with skills could fetch up to 30 pounds. That would have been quite a lot of money. Did he purchase someone even though he had no money, really, ready money to do it? Did he trade land for an individual? That's always a possibility. But we don't have the smoking gun here. But absence of evidence, doesn't equal evidence of absence. So again, we're in the we do not know category. Okay, so maybe we should explore Ethan Allen's own views about slavery. And like so many of the founding members of the first United States, there's a lot of complications. So many people, and Ethan was one of them, would be right in their propaganda, whether it was in the newspapers or pamphlets, and we all know Ethan was quite the writer. And they would say, isn't it terrible? First, the Yorkers, right, the New York people who were taking away the New Hampshire grants, and second, the British were trying to put the other people, whether it's the New Hampshire grant owners or the American revolutionists, they try to say, well, they're putting us into slavery. They're making us slaves. That's terrible. That's awful. And so you think someone with that mindset would be against slavery. Au contraire. His father and his brother both owned slaves. His father, we have a will from his father. His father had a slave working on his property. His brother Levi had a slave, and there was discussion back and forth. And for all that Levi and Ethan had a very interesting relationship, as I'm sure you heard if you were here at the last lecture, that was not a bone of contention. Ethan didn't say, well, you have a slave, how terrible of you. That's not why they quarreled. And when they made up, Levi still had his slave. So there we are. Now, this is a very interesting passage. Out of curiosity, has anyone read Reason, the Only Oracle of Man? Okay, well, I do recommend it, even though, maybe because I'm a religious studies person and I enjoy the bashing of so many fun things. Okay. I do. Okay. So this is chapter 10, section 2. And in this, he is trying to prove that Adam and Eve, as the progenitors of all of humanity, it's just a myth. It's just a story, which is, by the way, one of the reasons he got in such terrible trouble for writing this. But he is saying that there are, in fact, different human species, and that they all did not come from the same progenitors, that in fact, people of different colors and people of hues, people of different physical features actually had different parents, first parents. So we're not saying that all human beings are really created equal, as it were, but we're saying some are more equal than others. He said, and he reports this, that people who have done explorations find the habitable part of the world more or less populated by one kind or other of rational animals, and that considered as tribes or nations, there is evidently a gradation of intellectual capacity among them, some more exalted and others lower in the scale of being, and that they are especially diverse from each other in respect to their several animal nations. And he said, they are nevertheless considered as distinct tribes or nations. There are different sizes, and as to complexion, they vary from the two extremes of white and black in a variety of 20 mediums. And he said, it is manifest that they could never have lineally descended from the same first parents, whether their names were Adam and Eve or whatnot. And then he says, the acquaintance which we have had with the Negro nation in particular fully evinces the absurdity of supposing them to be of the same blood and kindred with ourselves. And he also has interesting things to say about folks of mixed race. He said, the Dutch colony at the Cape of Good Hope have enacted laws to punish with death such of their Dutch subjects as may be convicted of copulating with the Hottentots. For that, their nature is adjusted to be of an inferior species to theirs, so that mixing their nature with them would essentially denigrate and debase their own. Yeesh. This, by the way, it starts with, well, it doesn't start with Voltaire, but Voltaire is one of the individuals who believed this. There's actually a word for this. Polygyny is the belief that human beings, based on race, are actually different species, and some human groups are inferior to others. Monogeny is believing that there were Adam and Eve or two human progenitors. But it's also interesting that people who believe monogeny find reasons even religious reasons why people of color are less than white people. And we can talk about that perhaps at the Q&A if you're interested. So he would have no problem, I think, with enslaving anybody or having slaves. We just have no evidence that he did so. Okay. The name Newport was indeed likely a slave name. Why? Because Newport, Rhode Island was the main slave market for all of New England. And it brought in anywhere from 100,000, I've seen estimates as high as 180,000 folks from Africa who were then summarily enslaved. If he really was a mulatto, he may have been a child or a grandchild of a slave. So Newport, there are many, many Newports out there, tons of Newports of color. So this was when people had very little imagination. They called them based on the place they landed, and Newport was a very popular name. It's like Prince also. You have to look up somebody with the name of Prince. That's also, Newport is just about as common as Prince. Okay. So, looking up Newport, first name, last name, and I have to say this is very helpful. I want to give a shout out to the Vermont Historical Society and the Leahy Library, which is in Barre, which is actually where I live. And it is a treasure trove. First of all, you can get your Ancestry.com, you can get your newspapers.com, which has a lot of the older newspapers. They also have tremendous resources in terms of written records, the documents, just incredible. So going to there and going to the Silver Collection at UVM is a really, really great way of getting some of this colonial and early Revolutionary history. Well, you look up Revolutionary War documents in something like Ancestry, and there are Newports everywhere. And my personal favorite, Newport Negro. They just added names, and then they would have other names they would just throw in there, and they're all pretty condescending and terrible, but ways of saying this person was of color. And we know that both slaves and freed people of color fought in the Revolution for the American side as well as the British. Unfortunately, look as I could not find tax records, legal records, or church records in northern Vermont to establish a free Newport's residence that would happen to be available on Ancestry. And this is, by the way, this is the lazy person's way of doing it, because not everything is digitized. So if you really wanted to be a historian, you would have to go to so many of the small towns or reach out to the people involved in those historical societies and see if they have anything. Because the smaller the community, often the less frequently something will be digitized and available on something like Ancestry. It's tremendous resource, but it is not complete. Okay. Other Newports, I'll tell you about that at Q&A if you want. Okay, here is my real find, and I never expected to be able to find this. This is my shout out to serendipity, which is a nice way of saying I never expected to find this information in this book, in this place. So I was at Temple University Library, where I used to teach, and Temple University Library, like so many other university libraries, have taken much of their collection and put it in storage. You have to actually ask for the book. I have lots of thoughts about that, none of them positive, but they have a small collection that you can still browse. I was looking for something else. I thought, what the heck? Let me browse. And I went to Revolutionary War. I looked up some titles, and I looked at some of these books. And lo and behold, there was a book from 1944 called The Negro in the American Revolution. Okay? Now, my thought was, my goodness, wouldn't this have been a resource that others would have picked up on, that, the later books on Black participation in the American Revolution or Native American participation, they would have picked up on it. No, No, they didn't, and I'm really glad I looked. I took this book, held it in my hand, went to the index, and went to Newport. Now, usually when I did this, dozens of books, all I got was Newport, Rhode Island. And nothing about a name. But I looked, and it said Israel Newport. I went, uh-huh. And I looked at where the index led me and found out some really interesting things. So let's talk a little bit about what this book had to offer. So, it's talking, the gentleman who wrote this, his name is Benjamin Quarles, okay? And he said this, one of the notorious features of the American military service was the high incidence of unofficial absence. 1/3 of the regular troops deserted at one time or another. Negroes were sometimes included among those who ran away. A return of deserters to Ticonderoga on June 9th, 1777, lists a mulatto, Israel Newport. I thought to myself, this is interesting. First of all, he is described as a mulatto, and of course, that is what Holly Witters gave us. The second is that he was engaged at the battle in Ticonderoga, right? Just a hop, skip, and a jump from where we are now. And there was a newspaper article. The newspaper article was from the Boston Gazette from June 23rd, 1777, and it lists a number of people who kind of, I think, took the bonus when they signed up and then either waited for someone to transport them, which didn't happen, or just thought, they'll call me when they need me, and suddenly they are deserters. Now, one of them is listed, Israel Newport of Sandwich, right, all the way out in Massachusetts, a mulatto aged 21, 5'8". That's the description, okay? And he's the only one listed as mulatto. This was an interesting group, this listing, because it had Native Americans in it. It had other people who were called Negroes. It had white, specifically Irish, which I thought was kind of interesting. So who were all these folks? It was such a diverse group, and they all had to be shipped back to Ticonderoga. Okay, so according to the Sandwich records, the Sandwich Historical Society, he and a Daniel Newport signed up together, okay? And they signed up voluntarily, so that means they were free. Okay, these two individuals were free. He lived right next to Mashpee, but we checked, the Sandwich Historical Society checked with the Mashpee records, and they don't seem to have him listed as a Revolutionary War veteran. So chances are, if he is mulatto, if there was Native American heritage, that is not what he was owning. That was not where he had been connected to. Okay. Now, if we go to another rather old source, Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the Revolutionary War, a compilation from the archives. And sometimes this gets a little confusing, but according to this, Israel Newport was discharged from Fort Ticonderoga in 1777 and was given money to go home with. But according to the Sandwich Historical Society, there is no record he ever returned, which is interesting. Again, if you have money in your pocket, do you want to necessarily go back? Especially, he signed up with his relative, could have been his father, Daniel Newport, who was listed as Negro, okay? Died in 1778, whether from disease or from battle. So maybe that was his only connection. And maybe once his relative died, he didn't really see the point of returning to Sandwich. Now, how does him being at Ticonderoga connect up with the Allen family? That is just propinquity. That's just, he's in the neighborhood, okay? But we have one other link, and that is Udny Hay. And so let me just again quote from Quarles' book from 1944. American soldiers generally disliked assignment to the wagon, commissary, or forage services. Hence, it was not unusual for Negroes to find themselves enrolled in these departments. At Ticonderoga in June 1777, the Quartermaster General, Udney Hay, took Negroes from each regiment and formed them into a detail of constant fatigue men. Now, why am I harping on this name, Udney Hay? Does anybody have a thought?
He lived in Vermont.
Well, not just that. He did indeed. He was also a good friend of the Allen family, okay? He was their lawyer. And you might recall that Fanny and Jabez Penniman named one of their sons Udney Hay Penniman because of all of the legal work that Udney Hay had done for the Allen family, okay? And especially, I think they helped secure the homestead back from Ira, and, you know, they got the land back. So this was a man extremely close to the Allen family, okay? He also, by the way, because I was the one who created the finding aid for him for the library, just an aside, he had the world's messiest divorce in the 1700s. And it is like a reality TV show. He writes letters to his daughter. She writes letters to him, basically, Dad, I still love you even though I'm living with Mom, and Mom needs more money. And goodness knows what the heck happened there. There's even a letter from, I think, a second marriage where the woman writes and says something like, no, I wasn't sleeping with him when you were married to him. I'm telling you, if you're good at really faded 18th century handwriting, there is a story to be told about Udney Hay. But that being said, so it is interesting that Israel Newport was there when Udney Hay was separating out soldiers of color, and yes, training them to do things like drive wagons. Interesting, eh? So he was a free, black, young man with money in his pocket, could have easily stayed. Udney Hay, you know, if he, remember, this is the time when Ethan Allen is getting released from British prison. He might have needed someone to drive him around, quite frankly. And you can see that that connection could have been made. Total speculation, but a really interesting set of circumstances. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit also about the 12th Massachusetts, okay? And this was where Israel Newport served. Over 100 men re-enlisted into the new organization, the 12th Massachusetts Regiment of the Continental Line, under the command of Colonel Samuel Brewer. This regiment returned to Fort Ticonderoga in the spring of 1777. It was involved in skirmishing in early July and then fell back with the rest of the Northern Army. The 12th Massachusetts was present for the Battle of Saratoga. And this was a regiment that continued until 1781. They also had an incredibly diverse fighting force, as we even saw with the list of deserters. This was a very highly integrated regiment. And so, yes, Udney Hay decides, okay, we're going to segregate you now, but the enrollment process and a lot of the fighting happened with men from all kinds of different backgrounds. Not quite yet. So, what are we left with? We are left with the probability that there was this man named Newport working on the homestead. We don't know if he was slave, an indentured servant, or free, but we also are left with this very intriguing possibility of Israel Newport. Again, the way I think a careful historian would manage this is to go back into the Udney Hay papers and absolutely fine-tooth comb them for any mention of Newport as an individual or the name Israel Newport, okay? Going back into also the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia and seeing if they have more information. I did work with the National Archives. There's a whole section on Revolutionary War pensioners, that is, people asking for pensions as they got older, or their widows asking for pensions. There was no Israel Newport or Daniel Newport listed, but again, that's just trying to find those little pieces. So the history mystery is not yet solved. And if anyone wants to take up that history mystery, I'm happy to share my resources and we can make this kind of a joint effort. Sadly, this is true of a lot of people of color in colonial early revolutionary times. Elise Goyette did a magnificent job unearthing some of their stories, but we know it is extraordinarily hard. And I just want to end with somebody who actually has a Vermont connection. Okay, got to talk about him for a second because he's a fun guy, and I actually encountered him in my work with the National Archives. And he has a Vermont connection. Hamnet Ahmet was a 4'6" man of African heritage who was a drummer in the Revolutionary War. He said he had been enslaved by George and Martha Washington. We're not sure about that. And he has a Vermont connection. He was such a notable individual, such a character, that Emily Stedman wrote a little biography of him, which is unusual at those times, that a white woman would be writing a biography, as far as she knew, of this very, very unusual character. So if you want to know more about Hamnet Ahmet, I guess it's going to have to wait for next year and see whether I come back and I can tell you more about him and the Vermont connection. That's it, my friends. Thank you.
We have time for Q&A, so please, raise your hands.
I think you mentioned the first United States?
If I did, it was, I believe I misspoke.
Okay. I was wondering,
But the first and only so far? Let's hope.
it's only been one then.
That I know of, yeah. A little scary thinking about that. Okay, move on. Anybody have any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I know people hate me bringing this up, but Holly Withers, yes, that definitely was his name. He was my husband's fifth great grandfather.
Yes.
Buried in Georgia Plains,
Yes.
where my husband is. And so,
Yes.
and I do know, I've read somebody in a book that was published about Georgia families, I think. That family put together a story about him that talks about him, knowing Ethan and
He's-
and
I totally trust the account. I totally trust it,
the,
for sure.
I think his comments about knowing where Ethan was buried was published in the Burlington.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. First of all, yay, because I totally trust his account. Some people are, oh, he was old. Okay, doesn't mean he was out there. Come on. And thank you for Withers. Thank you for that, because it just, when you're looking in the census, it just, it screws up the names. Yeah, he also told us what Ethan looked like. These are things you don't forget. You just don't forget, because he was the hero for Ticonderoga. He was larger than life. So, yeah, I totally, totally trust his account. That's why I think Newport, yeah, that was his name. The one thing that was interesting to me is that they were taking this testimony in 1858. The Civil War is right around the corner. Vermont is clearly an abolition state by this point. He didn't say anything, at least not that was written down, whether Newport was a slave or a servant. Now, it could be that the gentleman writing down his account, because he did not write down his own account, it was the interviewer writing it down, could have just let that one go right by, because they were trying to sort of sanctify Ethan Allen, make him sort of a Vermont saint. And at that point, that would not sound too saintly. So, but I have to wonder, because that seemed like a huge omission, like it should have been on everybody's mind. And I wonder whether he did say something and it got omitted, or whether he didn't say something because he was a free man and there was no point in talking about that. Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's speculated that Ethan Allen may have had a few more, like, servants that were people of color. Did you encounter anything about them when you were researching Newport?
Sadly, they have no names. There were two, he refers to them as my Negroes in his letter to Levi, so that doesn't help us at all, okay? We don't really, census data, the first census was 1790, so we don't have any information about people of color specifically living on the homestead, except for, again, there was the testimony that he had 2 Negro men and a woman working for him. Now, Angie and I have a bit of a difference of opinion on this. I say that that certainly means that there were 2 men of color, and the woman, it seems like a separate thing, so it could have been maybe a white woman, it could have been a woman of Native American, we don't know. But some people assume that it's a woman of color. So, but 2 Negro men and a woman is how the story was related. So and I think there were at least 2 men of color, but the other one is nameless and the woman is nameless, and we are left with a lot of questions. Thank you.
I found the reading of the passage from Ethan Allen's book really interesting, because it was a reflection of the thinking of the time.
You bet.
And I couldn't help but think how that thread carried into
Yes.
eugenics.
Yes.
And how even up to the civil rights movement, and like today, when we talk about race, we may not, but we see things in black and white. But the thinking that went from the founders all the way up through our history seems to come from this idea that races did not necessarily come from Adam and Eve,
Right.
made in the image of likeness.
Yes.
So that, and this keeps sticking in my head, there's a scene in the film Rustin, where he has to try and convince Martin Luther King that he is a good representative of the civil rights movement. And he said, the same God that made me a Negro made me a homosexual. And maybe my brain is just like going all over the place, but this idea, this thread of separate but equal, like all of these different things are branches of the same philosophical
Yes.
underpinning of who is race, who is
Right, who is- right.
who's worthy,
Mm-hmm.
who is equal, and that, and just how he refers, even if Newport was free, he was still my Negro.
Right. Right. And I think that's what's really fascinating to me, because this was a club to beat religious people over the head with, because how can Adam and Eve even exist? It's nonsense. We can all see that different races must have had different parents. So that becomes the proto-science, which of course goes into all of the issues, as you mentioned, eugenics, racism, and so forth. And it gave people, the science and reason people, the Enlightenment people, a reason to keep people of color enslaved or oppressed, because they were different species. So as long as you can say that, you have an excuse. What about the people, many religious people, who said, oh, I believe in Adam and Eve, I believe all of humanity came from them? What was their excuse? Well, they decided to go into the Bible in the book of Genesis, and we have the experience of Noah, okay, who after he gets off of the ark with his sons, plants a vineyard and gets drunk, and his son Ham goes in, and apparently his father's lying there naked, and there's all, it's a very terse little piece in the Bible, and Jews and Christians just elaborate on it. But the section is the biblical piece is "Curse be Canaan, who is Ham's son," and the curse was supposed to have turned all of Ham's descendants black, and also curse them with other terrible things. So what we have is that went into apartheid in South Africa, that went into these beliefs. The Afrikaners picked those beliefs up. So either way, they were very hard-pressed to find reasons to keep a whole group of people enslaved, oppressed, and they both found ways to do it. Whether you were pro-Bible or anti-Bible, somehow the same conclusion gets drawn, and that's so incredibly frustrating and just a nightmare, in terms of our history.
Until John Adams wrote that all men are born free and equal.
And he writes that where?
For Massachusetts Constitution, Article 1, Part the First,
Right.
Declaration of Rights of the Inhabitants of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, some places were a little better than others, to say the least. And of course, we have this one step forward, two step backward experience nationally when Woodrow Wilson decides it was a great idea to resegregate the federal service. And so as late as that, we have people who were thrown out of jobs and pushed out of responsible and important positions. So yeah, it's a toughie. It's a long and tough road. Any other questions? Comments? Yeah.
I have a comment. I did some of this research with you, Carol, or alongside you, parallel. So it's a comment, just I guess, for the audience to just remember when you're looking at things in history, it's a completely, you have to kind of be like a sociologist. Like it's a different culture. It's a completely different world. And so it can be really easy and tempting to put our understanding of how the world works on the actions and words of people of the past when sometimes it shockingly doesn't fit. And so this is kind of building off of what Christine was mentioning earlier about how it was just this very different way of thinking than what is the norm today. And I wanted to throw out there the phrase, "my Negroes," that Ethan Allen uses in that letter is one of those cases that, as a historian of the 18th century, that reads to me as very common language of how people talked of people of different social classes.
Right.
Not necessarily a legal ownership relationship. So for example, Holly Witters, who we talked about earlier, was a teenage boy who also worked for the Allen family, and he's referred to in other documents as my boy, Ethan Allen's boy, and he was a white teenage boy. So the use of the possessive word "my" doesn't necessarily indicate a legal ownership.
Correct.
But I think there's just a lot of other things like that when you're trying to study these kind of topics. So everything you read, you have to then ask the question, how do I think they meant that? Versus how we interpret the words today.
That's why we just don't have a smoking gun. We can look at those without documentation. We just don't know. And I think that's fine to say we just don't know.
It's important to note that we don't have a smoking gun either way.
Correct.
It's very not clear either way what the status of Newport was.
Listen, personally, I'm an Israel Newport fan just because I stumbled across it. But,
It fits nicely.
Yeah, let me just go to something here real quick, and I just want to show you the other Newports because they're worth talking about. Come on. Here, okay. So I just want to point out, because one of these books just came out, Newport Gardener's Anthem, a story of slavery, struggle, and survival in early America. This was a man who was brought over from Africa as a slave, and he bought his freedom because he won the lottery. I have to say that's already a fascinating story. He became a real advocate for freed blacks in his community, and he was also a musician of some note. So it's a worthy book to read. And then there's Ezra Stiles. Ezra Stiles is the guy who said that Ethan Allen was burning in hell, president of Yale College. And his Newport experience was much worse, in my view. So he had a slave named Newport. He freed him, and then he went and took the position as president of Yale College. Newport returned to him, and in the 19th century, everyone was saying, look, he was a faithful guy, he freed him, but he still wanted to be with his master. Oh, no, 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 no. Newport went with his wife and his small son to Ezra Stiles, probably because they couldn't make it. They couldn't make a living. And Ezra Stiles did hire he and his wife for money, but he insisted that they sign over the rights to their little boy until he was 24 years old. So, yeah, we got Newports and Newports and Newports. But I do, and, you know, that's quite the shame. So Ezra Stiles, I don't know if Ethan is down and held by himself. I'm just pointing it out, sir. But I do recommend the Newport Gardener book because that story is just fascinating and marvelous and uplifting.
Carol, thank you so much for sharing all this information. Carol, we'll be sticking around for a few minutes if you had any more questions. Also, there are still some refreshments on the table. And the gift shop is open, should you need a souvenir. And at the front desk, you can pick up a membership form if you are not yet a member to help support the museum. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. You guys have a great day out there. It's beautiful.